Have you ever had one of those moments where someone tells you to mind your own business, and you decide to do the exact opposite? Yeah, this is one of those stories. Years ago, two door-to-door salesmen thought it was a good idea to ignore a no, argue with the wrong neighbor, and push their luck on a quiet street full of seniors. What they didn't know was that I had time that day. By the end of it, I walked them house by house, all the way to the end of the block, and made it very clear this street was not the one. I didn't yell, I didn't threaten. I just ruined their entire day. And honestly, I'd do it again. Many years ago, my wife and I bought a house on a street that felt like a time capsule. Every home was built in the 1950s, and nearly everyone living there had been there since the beginning. These were original owners, people who raised families, retired in place, and knew every crack in the sidewalk by heart. The street was quiet in that comforting way, where nothing dramatic ever seemed to happen, and everyone noticed when something felt off. We were the youngest people on the block by decades, and that difference showed immediately. Neighbors waved more, talked longer, and watched us with a kind of cautious optimism, like they were wondering if we'd stick around or disappear in a few years like others had. Over time, we did stick around, and without ever being asked, we started helping out. Rolling trash cans back after pickup, changing a light bulb here and there, checking on things during storms. It wasn't heroic. It was just neighborly. But slowly, that helpful role turned into something else. We weren't just residents anymore. We were part of the fabric of the street. And with that came a quiet sense of responsibility I didn't fully understand yet. One thing you noticed quickly on a street like ours was how vulnerable it could look from the outside. A row of tidy older homes, well kept, but clearly lived in by seniors, sends a signal to the wrong kinds of people. And sure enough, they came knocking. Door-to-door salesmen showed up constantly, treating our no soliciting signs like decorative suggestions rather than instructions. They weren't polite, either. These weren't friendly kids selling something harmless. They listened and talked fast, ignored discomfort, and pushed hard. I could see it happening from my window-long conversations that shouldn't have lasted more than 10 seconds. Neighbors visibly uncomfortable but too polite to slam the door. It made my skin crawl. The more I saw it, the angrier I got. These people weren't just annoying. They were predatory. They knew exactly who they were targeting and why. At first, I tried subtle solutions reminding neighbors they didn't owe anyone their time, suggesting they not open the door. But that only goes so far. Eventually, I started handling the salesman directly. I didn't yell at first, but I didn't sugarcoat either. I told them to read the signs and leave. Some did, some didn't. And every time they didn't, my patience got thinner. Here's the thing about me. I don't enjoy confrontation, but I'm also not afraid of it, and I have a very low tolerance for people who ignore clear boundaries. By the time this story really begins, my fuse was already short. I had dealt with enough salesmen to recognize the patterns of fake friendliness. The refusal to hear the word no, the way they lingered just long enough to wear someone down. I'd had more than one heated exchange by then, and honestly, I didn't lose sleep over it. If someone's job relies on ignoring consent, that's their problem, not mine. Most of them learned quickly that our street wasn't worth the trouble. They'd move along, maybe mutter something under their breath, and that would be the end of it. I thought we'd reached an understanding. But then came the pair who clearly hadn't gotten the memo. They were louder, pushier, and deeply offended by the idea that anyone would question their right to be there. When I confronted them, they didn't back down, they puffed up. And instead of leaving the street like they should have, they made a choice that instantly turned an annoying afternoon into something much more serious. After our first exchange, those two men decided to try their luck next door. That alone was irritating. But what really mattered was whose door they walked up to. That neighbor was one of my favorites kind, sharp, and well into her senior years. I happened to have my window open. I could hear everything. I heard her say no, calmly, clearly. Then I heard her say it again, firmer, this time. And still, they kept talking. That was the moment something in me snapped into focus. This wasn't about irritation anymore. This was about someone being cornered in her own home. I leaned out the window and told them, loudly, that she had already said no and they needed to leave. One of them shot back that I should mind my own business. That was, without question, the worst possible thing he could have said, because, at that point, It very much was my business. I went outside. I stood right there in the open, and I gave them a lecture they were not prepared for about consent, about boundaries, and about the fact that no is a complete sentence. I pointed to the sidewalk, and I told them to get off her property. They didn't like that. You could tell by their faces' tight smiles, wounded pride, the shock of being challenged, but they did what I told them. They walked down to the sidewalk. That should have been the end of it. Instead, I made sure it wasn't. As they turned to head for the next house, I pointed, not at them, at T Street. At T Street, one house at a time. I told them that every single home on that block was under my protection, that if they knocked on another door, I would be right behind them, that if anyone said no and they didn't leave immediately, I would restart my lecture from the beginning. Louder, longer. I wasn't bluffing, and I think they realized that still, they tested it. They started toward the next house, and I followed, not aggressively, not yelling, just present, watching. They knocked, they exchanged a few awkward words, and they moved on quickly, and so did I house after house. I stayed right there with them. Neighbors peeked through curtains. Doors stayed closed. The entire dynamic shifted. The hunters had become the uncomfortable ones. We walked the entire length of that street together. Slowly, painfully. I didn't rush them, and I didn't let them out of my sight. Every step was deliberate. I wanted them to feel watched, to feel the pressure they had been so comfortable putting on others. They tried to laugh it off at first, then to ignore me, then to speed up. None of it worked. By the time we reached the end of the block, their confidence was gone. They didn't knock on another door. They didn't say another word to me. They just left, and as they disappeared, the street settled back into its usual quiet, like nothing had happened. But something had changed. Neighbors came out later. They thanked me. They joked about it. They told me they felt safer. I brushed it off, but inside, I felt something solidify. A line had been drawn. Not just for those two men, but for anyone who thought our street was an easy mark. Word gets around faster than you think in neighborhoods like that. And after that day, the salesmen stopped coming. Looking back, I don't think of that moment as some grand act of bravery. I think of it as the natural outcome of caring about the people around you. Those neighbors had looked out for that street long before I ever lived there. They'd built lives, raised families, and earned the right to feel safe in their own homes. All I did was stand where I was needed. Consent isn't complicated, but it does require enforcement sometimes, especially when politeness is used as a weapon against people who are raised to be courteous. I learned that day that community isn't passive. It's active. It's choosing to step in when something feels wrong, even if it's uncomfortable, especially if it is uncomfortable. I also learned that boundaries mean more when someone is willing to defend them. That street wasn't just a collection of houses anymore. It was a shared responsibility. And I was okay with that. Stilham. It's been many years since that happened, but the memory still makes me smile. Not because I enjoy confrontation, but because I know it mattered. Those men never came back. Neither did others like them. And for a long time after, that street stayed exactly what it was meant to be. Quiet, respectful, safe. Every so often, I'll think about that walk to the end of the block and laugh to myself. Not everyone gets a moment where they know, without doubt, that they did the right thing. I got one, and if I ever found myself in that situation again, I'd do the same thing without hesitation. Because looking out for your neighbors isn't about being loud or tough. It's about being willing to say something, willing to step outside, willing to follow through. And sometimes, it's about ruining the day of someone who absolutely deserves it. At the end of the day, this isn't really a story about door-to-door salesmen. It's a story about choosing to care when it would have been easier to stay inside and mind my own business. Those neighbors trusted their street, their homes, and the people around them, and for a moment, that trust needed backing up. I didn't do anything extraordinary. I just refused to let politeness be used as a weapon against people who deserved peace in their own homes. That block taught me what community actually means. Not just waving hello, but standing up when something isn't right. The houses are older now. Some neighbors have moved on. Time has changed the street, the way it changes everything. But that moment still sticks with me, because I know it mattered. And if telling this story reminds even one person to look out for the people around them, to speak up when no isn't being respected, then it's worth sharing. Some lessons stay with you forever. And sometimes, so does the quiet satisfaction of knowing you protected what mattered.